My wife Lena's funeral was a quiet, somber affair. But as my son and his wife offered their condolences, I wasn't thinking about my loss. I was thinking about the secret my wife had left me. A secret that included a beautiful villa on a lake and nearly $1 million in a private account they knew nothing about. Just 1 week later, my son stood in the living room I had built with my own hands and told me, "Start packing, Dad. The house is sold." I just smiled. I had already packed. But my bags weren't for the nursing home he had chosen for me. They were for the new life my wife had given me. Before I tell you how my wife's brilliant final act turned their greed into my ultimate freedom, do me a favor. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you've ever had to quietly stand your ground against family who saw you as a stepping stone. Hit that like and subscribe button. You're going to want to hear how this ends. My name is Caleb Sterling, and I am 75 years old. For 50 years, my hands, which are now gnarled with age and arthritis, were the hands of a master carpenter. I built things. Furniture that would last 100 years. Cabinets so perfectly joined you couldn't find a seam. And this house, this quiet 2-story home in a leafy suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, I built it from the ground up for my Lena. Every floorboard, every window frame, every shingle on the roof was a testament to my love for her. Now she was gone, and the house was filled with a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The funeral had been that morning. The air in the house was still thick with the cloying scent of sympathy lilies and the lingering aroma of the casseroles people had brought. My son Jamal and his wife Tiffany were here performing the final act of their grief play. They weren't mourning, they were taking inventory. I sat in my old armchair, the one I had made for Lena when Jamal was just a boy, and I watched them. It was a strange, out-of-body experience, as if I were a ghost in my own home. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, a woman who valued brand names more than character, was moving through the living room with her phone held up. She wasn't taking pictures to remember the good times. She was taking pictures for an online appraisal app. I could hear her muttering under her breath as she focused on a porcelain vase my grandmother had brought from the old country. "This could be worth a few hundred," she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "The condition is excellent." She looked at our wedding portrait on the wall, not with any sense of sentiment, but with a cold, calculating gaze. "The frame alone is antique silver," she murmured, making a note on her phone. She then drifted over to the bookshelf, running a manicured finger. Not over the spines of the books Lena had loved, but over the wood of the shelf itself. "Solid cherry," she declared softly to herself. "Custom built, probably. That adds value." She was dissecting our life into a list of assets, her grief a thin, transparent veneer over a rapacious heart. Jamal, my son, was in the dining room, his back to me. He was on his phone too, but his conversation was different. His voice was a low, tense rumble, the sound of a man trying to keep a lid on a boiling pot of panic. "I told you the money is coming," he was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "Just give me another week. It's a sure thing now. The asset it's about to be freed up." He hung up and turned, and for a second our eyes met across the room. I saw no grief in his face. I saw only the frantic, hunted look of a man drowning in debt, a man who saw his dead mother's home not as a sanctuary of memories, but as a life raft. He gave me a weak, distracted smile, the kind you'd give a stranger in a waiting room before his attention was captured by the grandfather clock in the hall. It had been my father's, a family heirloom. Jamal walked over to it, not with the reverence of a son remembering his grandfather, but with the acquisitive air of a pawnbroker. He ran his hand over the polished wood, his eyes narrowed in calculation. The asset. That's what this house, this home had become to him, an asset to be freed up. They thought I was oblivious, a doddery old man lost in a fog of sorrow. They moved around me with a careless confidence, their whispers and their actions a testament to their belief in my irrelevance. They didn't know I was listening to every word, cataloging every greedy glance. They didn't know I was obeying a direct order from the woman they had just buried. Her voice was a constant presence in my mind, the last conversation we'd had just 2 weeks ago in the quiet, sterile room at the hospice. Her own voice had been a thin, reedy whisper, her body frail, but her mind, her brilliant, loving mind, had been as sharp as a diamond. "They're going to come for the house, Caleb," she had told me, her hand as light as a dried leaf resting on mine. "It's all they see. It's the only solution to the mess they've made of their lives." I had started to object to defend our son, but she had silenced me with a look. "I love our boy," she'd whispered, a tear tracing a path down her hollowed-out cheek. "But I am not blind, and neither are you. Their greed is a sickness, and we have been enabling it for too long. My death will be the final excuse they need." Then she had given me my instructions, the last and most important blueprint she would ever design. "I've made arrangements, my love," she'd said, a faint, tired smile touching her lips. "I want you to be at peace. But first you must do this for me. You must do nothing. You must say nothing. Don't tell them about the villa I bought on Lake Norman. Don't tell them about the money I put aside for you. Let them believe this house is all there is. Let them play their hand. Let them show you who they truly are. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me you'll just watch." And so I sat in my armchair, a silent sentinel in a house full of circling vultures, and I watched. I watched Tiffany appraise the value of my wife's life in dollars and cents. I watched Jamal pace the floors of his childhood home like a caged, desperate animal, seeing not memories but a solution to his financial failures. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The grief for my Lena was a vast, deep ocean. But beneath that ocean, a different feeling was beginning to stir. A cold, hard resolve. I was not just a grieving husband. I was the executor of my wife's final secret will. And the first act required only one thing of me: to sit and to wait, and to let them have all the rope they needed. The house grew darker as the afternoon wore on. They made a show of bringing me a plate of food from one of the casseroles, a gesture that felt both patronizing and performative. I thanked them with a weak, tired voice and pushed the food around on the plate, playing my part. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices now hushed, plotting. "We need to get a proper realtor in here, not just Henderson," Tiffany was whispering. "Someone who deals in this kind of property. We can list it as an estate sale." Jamal's voice was lower, more cautious. "We have to be careful, Tiff. We have to make it look like it's for his own good. The whole downsizing for the grieving widower angle. We can't look like we're pushing him." The disgust I felt was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. They weren't just greedy, they were meticulous in their deceit. They were crafting a narrative, a story to tell the world that would justify their theft. And I, their father, was the main character in their fiction, the helpless old man who needed saving. It was a role I would have to learn to play very, very well. A few days passed in a strange, hollow quiet. The sympathy casseroles in the refrigerator went largely untouched. The scent of the funeral lilies finally faded, leaving the house smelling only of itself, of old wood, and 50 years of shared life. It was a silence that was both a comfort and a torment. In it, I could almost hear Lena's quiet humming as she worked in the kitchen, but the sound was just an echo in the vast, empty museum of my memory. I spent my time in my workshop in the garage, not building anything but just running my hands over the smooth, familiar surfaces of my tools. The scent of sawdust and machine oil was a grounding force, a reminder of who I had been before I had become a widower, a soldier in a secret war. Then, as Lena had predicted, they came. I saw Tiffany's white luxury SUV pull into the driveway. They emerged, Jamal and Tiffany, not with the grim, distracted air of the day of the funeral, but with a new, purposeful energy. They were dressed in expensive casual clothes, looking like a power couple from a magazine. Tiffany carried a large, overflowing fruit basket, the universal prop of people performing concern. It was so perfectly cliché, it was almost comical. I met them at the door, my face arranged into the weary, sad expression I had been practicing. "Jamal." "Tiffany," I said, my voice a little hoarse. Come in, come in." "Oh, Daddy," Tiffany said, rushing forward to give me a hug. Her embrace was brief and brittle, her expensive perfume a jarring artificial scent in the quiet air. "We've been so worried about you all alone in this big house. Are you eating?" "You look so thin." "I'm managing," I said, shuffling back into the living room. I sank into my armchair, a deliberate, slow movement designed to convey the great weight of my grief and age. Jamal placed the fruit basket on the coffee table, a grand, meaningless gesture. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning everything, not with the greedy appraisal of the other day, but with a new, more proprietary air. He was no longer just a guest in this house. In his mind, he was already its steward, its temporary manager on the path to liquidation. "Dad," he began, his voice a smooth, carefully modulated tone of loving concern. "We've been talking, Tiffany and I. We know you're in a lot of pain, and the last thing you should be worrying about are practical matters. But there are things that have to be done for your own protection." I looked at him, my expression blank, inviting him to continue his performance. It was Tiffany who picked up the thread, perching on the edge of the sofa like a beautiful predatory bird. "What Jamal means, Daddy, is that with Mom gone..." Well, things like the home insurance need to be updated. The policy is probably in both your names. We need to make sure you are fully covered in case of, well, in case of anything. A fire, a storm. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of paperwork right now. The lie was so smooth, so well rehearsed. They had clearly spent the last few days crafting this narrative, this perfect justification for their intrusion. They were wrapping their greed in the language of responsible, loving care. I suppose you're right, I mumbled, looking down at my hands. Your mother always handled all of that. The paperwork, the bills. My head just isn't clear enough for it these days. Jamal and Tiffany exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look of confirmation. Their assessment was correct. The old man was confused, overwhelmed, and ready to be led. Exactly, Jamal said, his voice gaining confidence. So, we were thinking the first step is just to get a clear picture of everything. A friend of ours, a really wonderful guy, he's a top real estate broker here in Charlotte. He said he'd be happy to just stop by and do an informal valuation of the house strictly for insurance purposes. That way we can make sure the policy has the right level of coverage. He's not a formal appraiser, just a friend doing us a favor. It's no trouble at all. The lie was layered, beautifully constructed. A friend, informal, for insurance purposes. Every word was designed to soothe, to disarm, to make their predatory move seem like a simple, helpful errand. I knew, of course, that this friend was no friend. He was a scout sent to assess the value of the prize, to map out the terrain for the coming invasion. I had to play my part. I had to show them the weakness they so desperately wanted to see. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. I rubbed my temples as if a great headache were pressing in on me. And the broker. Oh, I don't know, son. Strangers walking through the house. It just feels so soon. We'll be right here with you the whole time, Daddy. Tiffany cooed, her voice a silken trap. It won't take more than an hour. He's very discreet. You won't even know he's here. Please let us do this for you. It would give us such peace of mind knowing that you're protected. She had framed it perfectly. To refuse would be to seem stubborn, irrational, to reject their loving care. I was being offered a role in their play, the role of the grateful, incompetent father. And I knew for Lena's plan to work, I had to accept it. I looked from my son's earnest, lying face to my daughter-in-law's beautiful, false one. I let a long silence hang in the air, a silence they would interpret as the slow, confused deliberation of a failing mind. All right, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. If you think it's for the best. I'm just so tired. You handle it. Whatever you think is best. The relief that washed over their faces was so profound it was almost comical. It was the look of a hunter who has just seen the prey walk willingly into the snare. They had him. They had their opening. They had my permission, my surrender. Thank you, Daddy. Jamal said, his voice thick with a false emotion that made my skin crawl. You won't regret this. We'll take care of everything. I'll give him a call right now. He might even be able to stop by this afternoon. Of course he could. I knew the man was probably already in his car parked just down the street waiting for the signal. The speed of their operation, the efficiency of their deceit was breathtaking. But I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, quiet resolve. They thought they were beginning their conquest. They had no idea they were simply the opening act in a play that my wife had already written. And the final devastating scene was all for them. A few days passed in a strange, hollow quiet. The sympathy casseroles in the refrigerator went largely untouched. The scent of the funeral lilies finally faded, leaving the house smelling only of itself, of old wood and 50 years of shared life. It was a silence that was both a comfort and a torment. In it, I could almost hear Lena's quiet humming as she worked in the kitchen, but the sound was just an echo in the vast, empty museum of my memory. I spent my time in my workshop in the garage, a space that was more cathedral than workspace to me. I didn't build anything. I just ran my hands over the smooth, familiar surfaces of my tools, the lathes and saws that had been my partners for half a century. The scent of sawdust and machine oil was a grounding force, a reminder of who I had been before I had become a widower, a soldier in a secret war. I was waiting. My wife had told me what would happen next, and I knew my duty was to be patient, to let the play she had written unfold exactly as she had intended. The curtain rose on the next act on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the living room looking through an old photo album when I saw Tiffany's gleaming white luxury SUV pull into the driveway. It moved with a quiet, predatory grace, looking utterly out of place on our humble, tree-lined street. They emerged, Jamal and Tiffany, not with the grim, distracted air of the day of the funeral, but with a new, purposeful energy. They were dressed in expensive, casual clothes, looking like a power couple from a magazine on their way to a weekend brunch. Tiffany carried a large, overflowing fruit basket, a ridiculously extravagant prop for their performance of loving concern. It was so perfectly cliché, it was almost comical. I met them at the door, my face arranged into the weary, sad expression I had been practicing. "Jamal, Tiffany," I said, my voice a little hoarse as if I hadn't used it all day. Come in, come in." "Oh, Daddy," Tiffany said, rushing forward to give me a hug. Her embrace was brief and brittle, all sharp angles and the cloying scent of a perfume that cost more than my first car. She pulled back and held me at arm's length, her eyes a cool and calculating blue, scanning my face with a look of practiced worry. "You look so thin. Are you eating at all? We've been so worried about you all alone in this big empty house." "I'm managing," I said, shuffling back into the living room. I sank into my armchair, a deliberate, slow movement designed to convey the great weight of my grief and age. Inside, I was a block of granite, still and watchful. Jamal placed the fruit basket on the coffee table, a grand, meaningless gesture that felt more like a business gift than a family offering. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning everything, not with the naked appraisal of the other day, but with a new, more proprietary air. He was no longer just a guest in this house. In his mind, he was already its steward, its temporary manager on the path to its inevitable liquidation. "Dad," he began, sitting on the edge of the sofa and leaning forward, his voice a smooth, carefully modulated tone of loving concern. "We've been talking, Tiffany and I. We know you're in a lot of pain and the last thing you should be worrying about are practical matters, but there are things that have to be done for your own protection." I looked at him from under my brow, my expression blank, inviting him to continue his performance. Lena's voice echoed in my mind. "They will try to make you feel like the house is a cage, Caleb, a burden you can no longer manage." It was Tiffany who picked up the thread, perching on the edge of the sofa like a beautiful predatory bird. "What Jamal means, Daddy, is that with Mom gone, well, the world doesn't stop, does it? Things like the home insurance need to be updated. The policy is probably in both your names. I was talking to a friend of mine whose father passed last year, and she said they had a terrible time because the insurance wasn't properly adjusted. We need to make sure you are fully covered in case of, well, in case of anything. A fire, a storm. Imagine having to deal with that kind of paperwork right now. It would be a nightmare." The lie was so smooth, so well rehearsed. They had clearly spent the last few days crafting this narrative, this perfect justification for their intrusion. They were wrapping their greed in the language of responsible, loving care, making it seem as though their every thought was for my well-being. I suppose you're right," I mumbled, looking down at my hands as if they were foreign objects. I let my voice sound reedy and uncertain. "Your mother always handled all of that, the paperwork, the bills. My head just isn't clear enough for it these days. It all feels so complicated." Jamal and Tiffany exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance over my bowed head. It was a look of confirmation of shared victory. Their assessment was correct. The old man was confused, overwhelmed, and ready to be led. "Exactly," Jamal said, his voice gaining confidence as he sensed my surrender. "So we were thinking, the first step is just to get a clear picture of everything. A friend of ours, a really wonderful guy named Richard, he's a top real estate broker here in Charlotte. We were telling him about the situation and he said he'd be happy to just stop by and do an informal valuation of the house, strictly for the insurance paperwork. That way we can go to the insurance company with a current accurate number and make sure the policy has the right level of coverage. He's not a formal appraiser, just a friend doing us a favor. He said it's no trouble at all, he was going to be in the neighborhood anyway." The lie was layered, beautifully constructed. A friend. Informal. For insurance purposes. Doing us a favor. Every word was designed to soothe, to disarm, to make their predatory move seem like a simple, helpful errand. I knew, of course, that this Richard was no friend. He was a scout sent to assess the value of the prize, to map out the terrain for the coming invasion. Lena's voice came back to me again from that sterile hospice room. They will use their friends, people who owe them favors, to do their dirty work. They will make it all sound so reasonable. I had to play my part. I had to show them the weakness they so desperately wanted to see. I had to walk into the trap with my eyes wide open. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. I rubbed my temples, a gesture of a man whose headache was a permanent companion. A broker. Oh, I don't know, son. Strangers walking through the house, through Lena's house. It just feels so... soon. We'll be right here with you the whole time, Daddy. Tiffany cooed, her voice a silken trap. It won't take more than an hour. He's very discreet. You won't even know he's here. You can just sit in your chair with your photo album. Please let us do this for you. It would give us such peace of mind knowing that you're protected, knowing that Mom's house is protected. She had framed it perfectly. To refuse would be to seem stubborn, irrational, to reject their loving care. I was being offered a role in their play, the role of the grateful, incompetent father. And I knew for Lena's plan to work, I had to accept it. Her final words of that last conversation came back to me. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me you'll just... watch. I looked from my son's earnest, lying face to my daughter-in-law's beautiful, false one. I let a long silence hang in the air, a silence they would interpret as the slow, confused deliberation of a failing mind. I was giving them time to savor their victory, to become comfortable in their deceit. All right, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. I did not look at them. I looked at a photograph of Lena on the mantelpiece. If you think it's for the best, I'm just so tired. You handle it. Whatever you think is best. The relief that washed over their faces was so profound it was almost comical. It was the look of a hunter who has just seen the prey walk willingly into the snare. They had him. They had their opening. They had my permission, my surrender. Thank you, Daddy. Jamal said, his voice thick with a false emotion that made my skin crawl. You won't regret this. We'll take care of everything. This is the right thing to do. I'll give Richard a call right now. He might even be able to stop by this afternoon since he's already in the area. Of course he could. I knew the man was probably already in his car parked just down the street waiting for the signal. The speed of their operation, the efficiency of their deceit was breathtaking, but I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, quiet resolve. They thought they were beginning their conquest. They thought they were managing a sad old man and his affairs. They had no idea they were simply the opening act in a play that my wife had already written, and the final devastating scene was all for them. Jamal's face lit up with a predatory relief. Thank you, Daddy, he said, his voice thick with a false emotion that made my skin crawl. You won't regret this. We'll take care of everything. I'll give Richard a call right now. He might even be able to stop by this afternoon since he's already in the area. Of course he could. I knew the man was probably already in his car parked just down the street waiting for the signal from his co-conspirators. The speed of their operation, the efficiency of their deceit was breathtaking. I just nodded a slow, weary gesture and sank back into my armchair. I picked up the heavy photo album from the side table and placed it on my lap, opening it to a random page. It was a prop, a shield, a place to hide my eyes so they wouldn't see the cold, calculating fury that was burning behind them. Jamal stepped into the hallway to make the call. His voice was a low, excited murmur. Tiffany, meanwhile, sat back down on the sofa, her posture transformed. The performance of the concerned daughter was over. She was now the triumphant lady of the manor surveying her new domain. She looked around the room, her eyes no longer lingering on individual objects, but on the space itself, imagining it empty, reimagining it with her own modern, soulless furniture. You know, Daddy, she said, her voice bright and casual, a lighter color on these walls would really open the place up. A nice neutral gray, perhaps. It would really highlight the architectural details. I didn't look up from the photo album. Your mother loved this color, I said quietly, my voice a soft murmur. She said it was the color of a robin's egg, the color of new beginnings. My words were not an argument. They were part of my performance, the ramblings of an old man lost in sentiment, a man who could not see the future because he was trapped in the past. Yes. Well, it's a bit dated now, she said, her tone dismissive. Jamal returned from the hallway, a wide, confident smile on his face. Richard is on his way, he announced. He was just finishing up nearby. He can be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The clock was ticking. For the next 10 minutes, I had to be the man they wanted me to be. I turned a page in the album. It was a picture of Lena and me standing in the unfinished frame of this very house, sawdust in our hair, our faces beaming with the pride of creation. I ran my thumb over her smiling face. This house wasn't a collection of assets. It was the physical manifestation of our shared dream. It was a 50-year love letter written in wood and nails, and they were about to walk through it with a stranger discussing its demolition. The doorbell rang precisely 10 minutes later. Jamal practically leapt to his feet to answer it. He returned with a man in a suit that was too shiny with a smile that was too wide. He had the restless, hungry eyes of a shark. "Dad, this is our friend Richard," Jamal said. "Richard, this is my father, Caleb Sterling." Richard approached me, his hand outstretched. "A real pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. He spoke to me loudly, enunciating every word as if I were deaf as well as senile. "I am so sorry for your loss. Your son and daughter-in-law have told me what a wonderful woman your wife was." I took his hand. His grip was firm, but his hand was soft, the hand of a man who made his living with words, not with labor. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice weak. "Not a problem at all," Richard boomed. "Happy to help the family out. Don't you worry about a thing, Mr. Sterling. We'll be quick and quiet. You just sit here and rest." He gave my shoulder a patronizing pat. And so the tour began. Tiffany and Jamal led him their dutiful guides on this predatory expedition. I remained in my armchair, the heavy album on my lap, a silent, seemingly oblivious observer. But I was not oblivious. I was a microphone recording every word, every whisper. My ears, which they assumed were as old and failing as the rest of me, were honed to a razor's edge. They started in the kitchen. "Good bones," I heard Richard say, his voice echoing slightly in the hallway. "Original cabinetry, though, a full gut job. But the footprint is good. You could knock out this wall, open it up to the dining room, create a real open-concept, entertaining space." "Exactly what I was thinking," Tiffany's excited voice replied. "And imagine a huge marble island right here." I stared down at a picture of Lena teaching a 5-year-old Naomi how to bake cookies in that same kitchen, her small hands covered in flour. Open concept, entertaining space. They were talking about erasing the heart of our home. They moved through the dining room, their voices a low murmur of financial calculation. "The hardwood floors are original oak," Jamal said. "That's a major selling point, right?" "Absolutely," Richard confirmed. "We'd need to refinish them, of course, darken the stain. But the quality is there. That's where the real value is." I looked at a picture of those same floors, worn smooth by the passage of 50 years of life, by the running feet of children, by the slow, comfortable shuffle of a long and happy marriage. The value wasn't in the oak, you fools. It was in the history. They came back into the living room. Richard looked up at the high ceilings I had so painstakingly designed. "Lot of potential here," he said to Jamal. "The fireplace is a great feature, but the brick is dated. We could reface it with stone or tile for a more modern look." He then turned to me, his wide, false smile back in place. "It's a beautifully built house, Mr. Sterling," he said loudly. "You did fine work. Do you happen to know when the roof was last replaced?" That's always a key question for buyers. I looked up at him, my expression one of pure, blank confusion. I let my eyes drift toward the ceiling as if the answer might be written there. "The roof." I asked, my voice distant. "Lena always handled that. I think there was a storm a long time ago. A big one. She was so worried about the old maple tree in the back." I let my voice trail off, my gaze becoming unfocused, as if I were lost in the memory of a storm from 20 years ago. I saw the look that passed between Jamal and Tiffany. It was a look of pity mixed with triumph. He was gone. The old man's mind was a sieve. He couldn't even remember a basic piece of information about the house he had built with his own hands. Internally, I recited the date of the roof replacement, the name of the contractor, the type of architectural shingles we had used, and the exact cost from the invoice that was filed neatly in my office. They moved upstairs, and I was left alone with my album and my thoughts. Their footsteps creaked on the floorboards above me, the ghosts of the future walking through the sacred spaces of my past. They were in our bedroom now, Lena's and mine. The thought of them in there with their stranger, their hired ghoul, putting a price tag on our private sanctuary sent a tremor of pure rage through me. But I pushed it down. I held on to Lena's final words. Just watch. After what felt like an eternity, they came back downstairs. Their faces were flushed with a quiet, triumphant excitement. The scout had returned from his mission and the news was good. The prize was as valuable as they had hoped. They huddled in the foyer, whispering in low, urgent tones. I pretended to be dozing, my head nodding slightly, but I heard them. The lot size is the real prize, Richard was saying. In this neighborhood, you could get a tear-down offer for close to 7 figures. If we list it as is quick cash sale. He won't be a problem, Jamal said, his voice confident. As you can see, he's not really all there. We'll be handling everything. It's the best thing for him, Tiffany added, her voice a perfect imitation of a concerned daughter. A smaller place, less to worry about. Richard clapped Jamal on the back. You're doing the right thing, he said. It's a hard thing, but it's the right thing. Then they were gone. The door closed and the silence rushed back in, heavier and more menacing than before. They were gone, but their presence lingered, a greasy film of greed and deceit that coated every surface of my home. I closed the photo album. The performance was over. I had played my part. I had shown them the confused, helpless old man they needed me to be. I had given them the rope, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it was only a matter of time before they would try to use it. The heavy silence rushed back in, the moment the front door closed, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the hollow silence of grief. It was the charged electric silence of a stage waiting for the next act. I sat perfectly still in my armchair, listening to the sound of their expensive car starting up and pulling away from the curb. They were gone, but their presence lingered, a greasy film of greed and condescension that coated every surface of my home. I didn't have to be in the car with them to know what was happening next. I could hear their conversation in my mind as clearly as if they were standing right in front of me, their masks off, their true faces revealed in the private, triumphant space of their luxury SUV. I could see them. Tiffany would be in the driver's seat, a triumphant, venomous smile on her face as she pulled away from the house she now considered hers. Jamal would be in the passenger seat, the tension finally draining from his shoulders, a look of profound relief on his face. And Richard the broker would be in the back, the victorious scout returning from a successful mission. The first to speak would be Richard, his booming, false baritone now replaced by the clipped, excited tone of a businessman who smells a commission. Well, he would say, clapping Jamal on the shoulder. That was easier than I thought. You were right, Jamal. He's completely out of it. Tiffany would laugh, a sharp, brittle sound devoid of any real humor. Out of it is an understatement. Did you see him? He was having a full-on conversation with a photograph. It's sad, really. The pity in her voice would be as fake as the designer handbag on the seat beside her. It's a mercy that we're stepping in to handle things. Can you imagine him trying to manage this property on his own? He'd probably just let it fall down around him. He won't be a problem. Jamal would say the words, a confirmation, a final judgment on his own father. He's too tired, too broken up about Mom. He literally told us to do whatever we think is best. We basically have his blessing to proceed. I could picture the way he would say it, twisting my words of feigned surrender into a justification for his betrayal. He needed to believe he was doing the right thing, the responsible thing. He needed to believe he was the hero of his own story, not the villain. Richard, ever the professional, would bring the conversation back to the numbers. So, let's talk strategy, he would say. The house has great bones, and the lot size is the real prize here. In this neighborhood, with the way things are turning over, a developer would pay a fortune for it. But that would take time, rezoning permits. You need a fast sale. A quick, clean cash offer. As is condition. I have a buyer in mind, an investor who loves these kinds of estate situations. No inspections, no haggling. We list it, he buys it. You get your money in 30 days. How much? Tiffany would ask, her voice sharp and eager. Don't lowball us, Richard. I'm thinking we can list it at $750, Richard would say. And I think my guy will bite. After my commission, you're looking at a very, very healthy payday. More than enough to solve your problems. I could imagine the look that would pass between Jamal and Tiffany at the mention of their problems. The mountain of debt that was suffocating them, the life they couldn't afford but refused to give up. This house, my house, was not a legacy to them. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. 750, Jamal would say, the number rolling off his tongue like a prayer. That would do it. That would clean the slate. It's a start, Tiffany would correct him, her ambition never satisfied. Once this is done and we have control of the rest of the estate, the real money will come. The stocks, the bonds Mom had. This is just the first step. The rest of the estate. They had no idea. They had no idea that the vault they were planning to raid was already empty. They were celebrating the capture of a pawn, completely unaware that the queen had already moved across the board and had them in checkmate. So what's the next step? Jamal would ask Richard, all business now. What do you need from us? I need a signed listing agreement, Richard would reply. As soon as you can get your father to sign it, I can bring the offer. The sooner the better before he, changes his mind or forgets he agreed. He'll sign, Tiffany would say with a wave of her hand, her confidence absolute. He's a lamb. We'll just tell him it's more insurance paperwork he needs to sign for his own protection. He won't even read it. The scene in my mind faded, and I was back in my armchair in the deep, profound silence of the house. I opened my eyes. I felt no surprise, no fresh wave of anger. I felt only a cold, grim confirmation of everything Lena had predicted. They were so arrogant, so sure of my weakness, so blind by their own greed. They saw me as a relic, a piece of old furniture to be moved out of the way before the real business could begin. They had no idea that the confused, broken old man in the armchair was the most dangerous thing they had ever encountered. Because I was not just a man, I was a promise, I was a plan, and I was just getting started. The week that followed the appraiser's visit was the quietest I had ever known. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a stage waiting for the final act to begin. I continued my performance, of course. I let my son's calls go to voicemail, only to call him back hours later, my voice foggy and apologetic, claiming I must have misplaced my phone again. I spoke to Tiffany on one occasion, asking her the same question about her work twice in the space of 5 minutes. I could hear the condescending pity in their voices, but underneath it there was a new triumphant confidence. In their minds, the battle was already over. They had assessed their target, confirmed his weakness, and were now simply waiting for the opportune moment to claim their prize. I spent most of my time in my workshop, the scent of cedar and sawdust, a comforting balm to my soul. I wasn't just waiting. I was preparing. I was sharpening the tools for the job my wife had left for me to do. The moment came as I knew it would, a week to the day after the funeral. It was late afternoon. I was in the living room, sitting in my armchair by the window, reading the newspaper. I heard a car pull into the driveway, but it wasn't Tiffany's ostentatious white SUV. It was Jamal's sedan, and he was alone. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. This was it. The time for pretense and fake concern was over. This was a business call. He didn't ring the doorbell. He used his old key, the sound of it scraping in the lock, a jarring proprietary sound. He walked in not as a visitor, but as the new master of the house. His face was a cold, emotionless mask. The loving, worried son was gone, replaced by a man I barely recognized, a man on a mission. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't offer a greeting. He just stood in the middle of the room, his car keys jingling nervously in his hand. I slowly lowered my newspaper, looking up at him over the rim of my reading glasses. I arranged my face into an expression of mild, weary confusion, the role I had perfected over the last week. "Jamal," I said, my voice soft. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," he said. "We need to talk." He remained standing, towering over me, a deliberate posture of power. He was no longer asking for permission. He was asserting his authority. "I've been talking with Tiffany. We've been handling everything, looking at the numbers, thinking about the future. Your future." I just looked at him, my silence an invitation for him to continue to walk deeper into the trap. Lena's voice was a whisper in my ear. "Let him play his hand, Caleb. Let him show you who he is." "This house," he said, gesturing around the room with a sweep of his hand. "It's too much for you. The upkeep, the taxes, the memories. It's a burden. You're not safe here alone. You're forgetting things. You're not taking care of yourself." His voice was devoid of warmth, a clinical recitation of facts he had manufactured to justify his own actions. He was building a case, not for a judge, but for his own conscience. "You need professional care," he continued, his gaze unwavering, his voice hardening with a terrible self-righteous finality. "You need to be in a place where people can look after you. A place with people your own age. A place with organized activities. I knew what was coming. Every word he spoke was a perfect echo of the fears my wife had described in her last days. He was following the script she had predicted with heartbreaking accuracy. He took a deep breath, the final pronouncement ready on his lips. "I have some news, Dad," he said, his voice now completely stripped of any emotion. "I've sold the house. We got a fantastic cash offer, a developer who wants the land. It's a done deal. I took it." He let the words hang in the air, expecting them to crush me, to shatter my world. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was braced for my reaction. He was expecting tears. He was expecting pleading. He was expecting the helpless rage of a powerless old man. "The closing is in 30 days, he went on, his voice gaining momentum as he delivered the final blows. "That means you have 1 month to pack your personal belongings, the things you want to keep. I've already arranged for a moving service to handle the rest, and don't you worry about a thing after that. I found a wonderful place for you. It's a senior living community called Sunny Meadows. It's very highly rated. They have a lovely garden, a library. The proceeds from the sale of the house will go into a trust account that I will manage. It will cover all your expenses there for the rest of your life. It's all been taken care of. It's the best thing for you." He finished his speech. He had done it. He had, in his own mind, just saved his father from a life of lonely decay and not coincidentally saved himself from financial ruin. He stood there, a conquering hero in his own sordid drama, waiting for my inevitable collapse. The silence in the room was absolute. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not plead. I slowly, deliberately folded my newspaper and placed it neatly on the table beside me. I took off my reading glasses and carefully cleaned them with a handkerchief from my pocket. Every small, mundane action seemed to stretch for an eternity, the silence building to an unbearable pressure. Jamal's confident expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I looked up from my glasses and met his gaze. I looked into the eyes of my only son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, the man who was now standing before me, having just sentenced me to a slow, lingering death in a place called Sunny Meadows. And I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a happy smile. It was a slow, quiet, knowing smile. It was the calm, placid smile of a man who is 3 moves ahead in a chess game his opponent doesn't even know he's playing. It was a smile that held 50 years of memories, a final secret promise, and the chilling, beautiful certainty of the justice that was to come. I saw the confusion in his eyes curdle into a genuine creeping unease. My reaction had thrown him completely off balance. He had been prepared for a fight, not for this strange, unnerving calm. "Oh, that's good news, son," I said, my voice light and airy, utterly devoid of the grief and panic he had expected. "That's a real load off my mind." I picked up my teacup from the table. "Because you see," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip, "I've already packed, but the bags I packed aren't for Sunny Meadows." He finished his speech. The words hung in the air between us, a death sentence delivered with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a corporate layoff. He had done it. He had, in his own mind, just saved his father from a life of lonely decay, and not coincidentally saved himself from financial ruin. He stood there, a conquering hero in his own sordid drama, waiting for my inevitable collapse. He was braced for the explosion of grief and rage, for the pathetic, useless pleading of a powerless old man. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady metronomic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. A sound that had measured out the 50 years of my marriage and was now measuring the final agonizing seconds of my son's betrayal. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not plead. In that moment of ultimate disrespect, a strange and profound calm washed over me. It was the calm of a captain who, having been told his ship is sinking, knows that he is secretly standing on the deck of a submarine. I could feel Lena's presence beside me, not as a ghostly whisper, but as a solid grounding force. Her plan, her foresight, her fierce protective love, it was a shield around my heart. I was not a victim listening to his sentence. I was a judge watching a criminal deliver a full and damning confession. Slowly, deliberately, I folded the newspaper that was resting on my lap. I placed it neatly on the small table beside me. I took off my reading glasses and carefully cleaned the lenses with a handkerchief from my pocket. Each small, mundane action seemed to stretch for an eternity, the silence in the room building to an unbearable pressure. I could see Jamal's confident posture begin to waver. My lack of reaction was not part of his script. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the keys in his hand giving a nervous little jingle. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I looked up from my glasses and met his gaze. I looked into the eyes of my only son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, the man who was now standing before me, having just sentenced me to a slow, lingering death in a place called Sunny Meadows. And I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a happy smile. It was a slow, quiet, knowing smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the calm, placid smile of a man who is 3 moves ahead in a chess game his opponent doesn't even know he's playing. It was the serene, detached expression of a builder who watches a fool try to tear down a house without realizing the foundation is made of solid granite. There was a hint of pity in it for the desperate, lost man standing before me, but underneath there was an edge of cold, hard, unyielding steel. It was the most unnerving thing my son had ever seen. The confusion on his face was immediate, his brow furrowed. What he asked, the single word sharp with irritation. "What's so funny?" I didn't answer. I just continued to look at him, my smile unchanging. I saw the arrogant confidence in his posture begin to crumble, replaced by a defensive, aggressive stance. "Are you even listening to me, Dad?" He snapped, his voice rising. "This is serious. I've just solved all of our problems. I've secured your future. The least you could do is show some gratitude, or at least some understanding." I continued to sit in silence, my stillness a stark contrast to his growing agitation. I was the rock, and he was the frantic, useless wave crashing against it. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. He had walked in here as the conqueror, the man in control, but now faced with a reaction he could not comprehend, his control was slipping. A creeping sense of dread began to crawl into his eyes. This was wrong. This wasn't how the victim was supposed to act. A predator knows when its prey is not afraid, and it is the most terrifying discovery in its world. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, taking a half step toward me. "Did you not hear what I said? The house is sold. You have to leave. Are you having one of your episodes? Did you forget already?" He was trying to reassert his narrative to force me back into the box of the confused old man he needed me to be. But the box was broken. I let out a soft, quiet sigh, the smile finally fading from my lips, replaced by an expression of profound, weary disappointment. I looked at him, at his furious, frightened face, and for a moment the image of the man was replaced by the ghost of the little boy. He had been a boy who always broke his toys because he could never understand how they worked. He had done it again. He had broken the most precious thing of all our family, and he didn't even understand the value of what he had destroyed. My heart ached with a final terrible pang of fatherly grief. This was the last time. This was the moment I had to let him go, not just from my house but from my heart. I had to choose between the memory of the boy he had been and the promise I had made to the woman I loved. And there was no choice at all. "Oh, that's good news, son," I said, my voice light and airy, utterly devoid of the grief and panic he had expected. "That's a real load off my mind." I picked up my teacup from the table, my hand as steady as a surgeon's. "Because you see," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip, "I've already packed. But the bags I packed aren't for Sunny Meadows." My smile, so unexpected, so out of place, seemed to have broken something in him. The carefully constructed facade of the responsible, concerned son crumbled, revealing the raw, frantic desperation beneath. He had come here to deliver a final killing blow, and he had been met not with the collapse he expected, but with a quiet, unnerving calm that he could not comprehend. It was the calm of a man who held a winning hand, and my son, a lifelong gambler, could suddenly feel the cold dread of a losing streak. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice no longer smooth and controlled, but sharp and ragged with frustration. He took a step closer, his body tense, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate, to regain control of the room. "Did you not hear what I said? Are you having one of your episodes? The house is sold. SOLD. You have to leave." Is that simple enough for you? Or has your mind really gone that far? I didn't answer. I just continued to look at him, my expression one of serene, almost pitying observation. I saw not a powerful man making a difficult decision, but a terrified child having a tantrum because the world was not bending to his will. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of the debts he had accrued, the fear of the life he could not afford, the fear of his wife's disappointment. And I saw that all of that fear had been twisted into a cruel, desperate anger, and he had aimed it all at me. He mistook my silence for incomprehension, for weakness. "Look," he snapped, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a glossy, folded brochure. He threw it onto the coffee table in front of me. It slid across the polished wood and came to a stop against the base of my teacup. The cover showed a picture of smiling, silver-haired seniors sitting on a sunny lawn. In cheerful, looping script, the title read, "Sunny Meadows, the Golden Years Redefined. This is your new home," he said, his voice rising, jabbing a finger at the brochure. "It's all arranged. I've done everything for you. I've taken the burden off your shoulders. All you have to do is pack a few sentimental things and go. We are handling everything else. Why aren't you listening? Why are you smiling like that?" I let his tirade wash over me. Every word he spoke was another nail in his own coffin. He was confessing his entire callous plan with a self-righteous fury, and he had no idea that his every move had been predicted, his every word anticipated. I thought of Lena, of her sad, wise eyes in that hospice room. "He will believe he is saving you, Caleb," she had told me. "He has to. It is the only way he can live with himself." She had known him so perfectly. I let his anger run out of steam until he was just standing there breathing heavily. His face flushed, looking at me with a baffled, furious expression. I finally broke the silence. I picked up my teacup, my hand as steady as the oak tree outside the window. "Oh, that's good news, son," I said, my voice light and calm as if he had just told me about a pleasant turn in the weather. "That's a real load off my mind." The response was so completely alien to the situation that it stopped him cold. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "A load off your mind," he stammered. What are you talking about?" "All that packing," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my now cold tea. "It's a lot of work for an old man. So many things to sort through. 50 years of life. I was worried about how I would manage it all." He seized on this, a flicker of understanding, of victory returning to his eyes. He thought he finally understood. He thought I was thanking him. "Exactly, Dad," he said, his voice softening, becoming patronizing again. "You don't have to manage it. The movers we've hired will handle all the heavy lifting. They'll pack up all the furniture. You just have to worry about your clothes and your personal keepsakes." I placed my teacup back on its saucer with a soft, definitive click. I looked him directly in the eye, and the smile returned to my face, a little wider this time, a little colder. "Oh, but that's the best news of all, son," I said, my voice a soft, almost cheerful purr that was more menacing than any shout. "You see, the packing is already done." He stared at me, his confusion returning. "Done? What do you mean, done?" "I was just here a few days ago. You haven't packed a thing." "That's true," I said. I leaned back in my armchair, a picture of perfect, unbothered tranquility. "I haven't. But as I said, the packing has been taken care of." I let him struggle with the riddle for a moment, watching the frantic calculations behind his eyes. He was trying to make it make sense, but the pieces didn't fit. And then I delivered the final, impossible, devastating line. "It was so thoughtful of you to sell the house," I said. "It really was. Because I've been so busy packing up all the furniture. But it wasn't for me. You see, son, the things I packed, they weren't my things at all." I let the words hang in the air between us. The sentence was a paradox, a piece of nonsense that was delivered with the weight of an absolute truth. It was a key that did not fit the lock he was trying to open. It was a move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His anger, his confidence, his frustration, it all evaporated, replaced by a single profound and chilling expression of utter baffled confusion. He looked at me as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language, a language of madness and impossibility. "What?" He whispered the single word, a breath of pure bewilderment. "What does that even mean?" I didn't answer him. I simply picked up my newspaper again, unfolded it, and continued to smile. Jamal stood on the other side of the door, his mind reeling from a statement that made no sense. He was a man who had just been told the sky was green, a man whose entire reality had been upended by a quiet, nonsensical sentence. I didn't wait to hear his confused questions or his eventual burst of anger. I turned the deadbolt, the sound a final, satisfying click, and walked back to my armchair. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. The victory was not sweet. It was the bitter, necessary medicine my wife had prescribed. I picked up a silver-framed photograph from the mantelpiece. It was of Lena, taken just a few years ago in her garden, the sun in her hair, her hands covered in dirt, a radiant smile on her face. Looking at her, the walls of the living room seemed to dissolve, and I was transported back to that other room, the sterile white room at the hospice where she had given me my final orders. The air in that room had smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Machines beeped and whirred, a heartless electronic lullaby. Lena was propped up on a mountain of sterile white pillows, a shadow of the vibrant woman who had filled my life with color for 50 years. Her body was frail, a delicate birdcage from which the bird was preparing to fly. But her eyes, when they met mine, were as clear and sharp as they had ever been. I was holding her hand, its skin as thin as parchment, and I was lying to her and to myself. The doctor said, "You're responding well to the new treatment I had," said my voice thick with a hope I didn't feel. "Just a few more days of rest, my love. We'll have you home soon. You'll be back in your garden by the time the roses bloom." She had squeezed my hand, a surprisingly strong gesture that spoke of the iron will that still resided within her failing body. "No, Caleb," she had whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "There are no more roses for me, and we both know it. Stop trying to build a wall against the ocean. It's time we talked about what comes after the tide." Her directness was a shock, a dose of cold, hard reality I wasn't ready for. I started to object, to offer more useless platitudes, but she just shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Listen to me, my love. We don't have much time, and I have things I need to tell you. Things I have done. And things I need you to do." I had knotted my throat too tight to speak. "I have been watching them." She began, her gaze distant, looking at something far beyond the sterile white walls of the hospice room. "Our son? His wife. I see the way they look at this house when they visit. Tiffany came to see me yesterday. She thought I was asleep. I heard her on the phone in the hallway talking to one of her friends. She was complaining about having to come here to this depressing place. And then she laughed and she said, 'Well, it'll all be worth it in the end. The house alone is my retirement plan.'" The cruelty of the words spoken by my wife in that quiet, dying whisper was a physical blow. "And Jamal," she continued, a tear tracing a path down her hollowed-out cheek. "Our boy. He came to me last week. He needed a loan," he said, "a big one, for a surefire business opportunity. He was so desperate, Caleb. I almost gave it to him. But something told me to wait. I had my lawyer, Mr. Clayton, do some quiet checking. There was no business opportunity. Tiffany had run up over $50,000 in credit card debt on a shopping trip to New York. He was trying to bail her out without you knowing. Again. The shame I felt was immense. We had raised him better than this, but the evidence was undeniable. "They are in trouble, my love," she said, her voice full of a profound, bottomless sorrow. "Deep trouble. And I know, as surely as I know the sun will rise tomorrow, that as soon as I am gone, they will come to you. They will see this house not as their childhood home, but as a solution to their problems. They will try to convince you to sell it. And if you refuse, they will find a way to take it. They will use your grief, your age, your love for them as weapons against you." She paused, taking a ragged breath. Her eyes, when they met mine again, held a new, determined spark. "But I am not going to let that happen," she had said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "I will not let them turn our home into a solution for their bad decisions, and I will not let them turn you into a victim." That was when she told me everything. She explained that after her diagnosis, she had met secretly with Mr. Clayton, an old trusted lawyer. He had done a full review of our assets. In doing so, he had rediscovered a fact we had both long forgotten, that when we had refinanced the house 15 years ago, the new deed had been put solely in my name for tax purposes. Legally, the house was already mine and mine alone. Jamal had no claim to it. Then she told me about her own secret inheritance, a portfolio of stocks. Her father had left her an asset we had never touched, letting it grow for decades as a nest egg for our old age. She had instructed Mr. Clayton to quietly liquidate it. "There's a villa, Caleb," she had whispered, her eyes bright with the vision she was painting for me, "on the shore of Lake Norman. It's not as big as our house, but it's beautiful. I saw pictures. It has a large detached garage right by the water. I told the realtor it had to have a space for a workshop, a place where you can make things again, a place where you can find peace away from all of this." She had bought it. It was already mine, waiting for me. I had stared at her speechless. She had been dying, and yet she had been secretly building me a new life. And there's money she had, continued her voice urgent as if she were running out of time. I've placed $900,000 into a private trust. Your name is the only one on it. Jamal and Tiffany have no idea it exists. They cannot touch it. It's your freedom, Caleb. It's the freedom to say no. It's the power to live the rest of your life on your own terms without being a resource for them to drain. It's my final gift to you. The scale of her foresight, the depth of her protective love was overwhelming. She had been dying, and yet she had spent her final months building a fortress around me. And then she had given me my final, most difficult instruction. You must promise me something, my love, she had said, her grip on my hand tightening, her eyes boring into mine. When I am gone, you must say nothing. Not a word about the villa, not a word about the money, not a word about the deed to this house. Let them believe this house is all there is. Let them make their move. Let them show you who they are once and for all. Don't fight them. Don't argue. Just watch. It's the only way you will ever truly be free of their demands. It's the only way they might one day be forced to stand on their own 2 feet. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me. I had looked into her eyes, and I had seen the pain and the love and the fierce, unyielding strength that had been the bedrock of my life for 50 years. And through my own tears, I had promised. It was the hardest promise I had ever made. The memory faded, and I was back in my armchair in the dark, silent house. I was holding the silver frame, my thumb stroking the glass over Lena's smiling face. The confusion on Jamal's face as he stood on my porch, baffled by my calm, was the first sign, the first crack in his arrogant certainty. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he was in control. He had no idea that he was just an actor playing a part in a tragic play that his own mother had written. And the final act was about to begin. The month that followed my son's ultimatum was the longest and quietest of my life. I was living on a stage playing the final tragic act of a play for an audience of 2. I continued my performance as the defeated, heartbroken father. When Jamal called to give me the details of the moving company he had hired or the admission date for Sunny Meadows, I would respond with a quiet, resigned sigh. When Tiffany called to ask if I had started sorting through my sentimental keepsakes, I would tell her I was too tired, that it was all too much. I could hear the triumphant, patronizing pity in their voices. They were so sure of their victory. They were so sure of my weakness. They were so completely and utterly blind. While they were busy arranging the logistics of my exile, I was busy with my own quiet work. During the day, I would sit in my armchair, the grieving patriarch. But at night, the house would come alive. I moved with a quiet, methodical purpose, a master carpenter at his final, most important project. I was not packing my own life into boxes. I was carefully curating the inheritance my children so richly deserved. I took down the expensive paintings Lena and I had collected over the years and replaced them with cheap prints from the thrift store. I boxed up my mother's silver and my father's antique watch and replaced them with polished, worthless fakes. Every object of real monetary or sentimental value was carefully wrapped and hidden away in my workshop, a silent testament to a life they had forfeited. The house was being transformed into a museum of their failure, and they had no idea. The morning of the move arrived, a bright, clear day at the beginning of the month. It was the kind of beautiful, hopeful morning that felt like a cruel joke. I did not feel hopeful. I felt only a profound and heavy sense of finality. I woke early. I had my coffee on the patio looking out at Lena's garden, which was bursting with late-season blooms. I said my goodbyes to the house, to the memories, to the 50 years of love that lived in its walls. And then I sat in my armchair, a book open on my lap, and I waited for the vultures to arrive. I heard it before I saw it, a low rumbling groan that grew into the loud hydraulic hiss of a large truck's air brakes. The sound shattered the peaceful quiet of our neighborhood. I looked out the window and saw it. A massive moving truck, its side emblazoned with the logo "We Get It Done Movers," was parked in front of my home, taking up half the street. It was an obscene, brutalist statement of intent. It was an invasion. A moment later, Tiffany's white SUV pulled up behind it, gleaming in the morning sun. They emerged, Jamal and Tiffany, looking not like a son and daughter-in-law coming to help an old man, but like conquerors arriving to claim their spoils. Tiffany was dressed in a stylish, expensive athletic wear outfit, as if she were about to supervise a particularly strenuous yoga class. She held a clipboard and a designer coffee cup, the very picture of an efficient modern woman of property. Jamal was beside her, his face relaxed and smiling for the first time in months. The hunted, desperate look was gone, replaced by the smug, easy confidence of a man who believes he has solved all his problems. I watched them from the window as Jamal spoke to the moving crew, a group of large, bored-looking men. He gestured toward the house with a proprietary air, the new lord of the manor giving orders to his subjects. Then they started toward the front door, their steps sure and confident. I did not wait for them to knock. I rose from my chair, placed my book on the table, and walked to the door. I opened it just as Tiffany was reaching for the doorbell. They stopped, slightly surprised. "Oh, good, you're up," Tiffany said, her voice a bright, cheerful chirp that made my teeth ache. "We were hoping you'd be ready. The men are here to help you with your things." "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and even. "I've been waiting for you." I stepped back, holding the door open for them. Jamal walked in first, clapping his hands together. "All right, Dad, big day," he said, his voice booming in the quiet hall. "Don't you worry about a thing. Tiffany and I will supervise everything. Just point the men to the boxes you've packed with your personal items and they'll get those loaded first, so they don't get mixed up with the furniture that's going into storage." He was so confident, so in charge, he had it all planned out. My personal trinkets to the nursing home, the valuable furniture to a storage unit from which I had no doubt it would be sold to pay off his debts. "There are no boxes," I said quietly. Jamal stopped and turned to look at me, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "What do you mean there are no boxes, Dad? We talked about this. You were supposed to pack the things you wanted to take to Sunny Meadows." "I know," I said. I decided not to. I watched as they stepped fully into the living room, their confident smiles beginning to waver. They looked around. The room was immaculate. The furniture was polished. The photographs were straight on the walls. The house did not look like the home of a man who was about to be moved into an assisted living facility. It looked normal. It looked like it was waiting for Lena to walk in from the garden, a basket of fresh flowers in her hand. "Dad, what is this?" Tiffany asked, her bright, cheerful tone gone, replaced by a sharp, suspicious edge. "Where are your things? Why isn't anything packed?" "The movers are on the clock." I looked at them. I looked at their confused, demanding faces. The pity I had once felt for them was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were standing in the heart of the life my wife and I had built, a life they had tried to steal, and they saw nothing. They felt nothing. They were strangers here, and it was time to make that official. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Why don't you have a seat? The real owner of the house will be here shortly to discuss the inventory." My words hung in the air, a quiet, nonsensical statement that seemed to short-circuit my son's brain. "The real owner," I had said. The phrase was a direct challenge to the reality he had so carefully constructed. He and Tiffany exchanged a look of pure, baffled irritation. They were done with my games with the ramblings of a confused old man. "What is he talking about?" Tiffany snapped, her voice a sharp, impatient hiss. She pushed past me into the foyer, her eyes scanning the house for the signs of a move in progress. "Dad, where are your boxes? The movers are on the clock. This is costing us money." Jamal followed her, in his face a thundercloud of frustration. "Did you not pack at all?" he demanded, his voice rising. "After everything we discussed. After I arranged everything for you, we had an agreement. We did not have an agreement." "Son," I said calmly, closing the front door behind them. "You had a plan. There's a difference." They ignored me. Their first impression, I could see, was simple annoyance. The house was neat, clean, and looked completely untouched. They had been expecting chaos, piles of boxes, the organized disarray of a life being dismantled. Instead, they had found a quiet, stubborn stillness. They were still operating under the assumption that I was the problem, a disobedient child who had refused to follow instructions. "Unbelievable," Tiffany muttered, dropping her clipboard onto the hall table with a loud, angry clatter. "He's just being difficult." "Fine. We'll just have the movers start with the heavy furniture. Jamal, tell them to start in the living room with the sofa and the display cabinet." "No," I said. The word was not loud, but it stopped them in their tracks. They both turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage. I had never used that tone with them before. It was the quiet, unyielding voice of a man who was no longer asking for permission in his own home. "What do you mean, no?" Jamal said, taking a threatening step toward me. I said, looking him directly in the eye, that you will not be moving a single thing in this house today." The dawning horror began then. It started in Tiffany's eyes. A flicker of confusion, a sudden terrible thought that something was deeply wrong with their perfect plan. "What have you done?" she whispered, her eyes darting around the room, finally noticing the subtle absences. The small, valuable silver clock was missing from the mantelpiece. The antique lamp that had sat by my armchair for 30 years was gone. She rushed past me, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floors. "Where is it?" she almost shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet house. She went straight to my study. I followed them, my steps slow and deliberate, a calm observer watching the predators realize the trap had sprung. They found the study eerily neat. The books were on the shelves, the desk was polished. But the personal photographs that had always cluttered the desk were gone. The drawers, which had held a lifetime of paperwork, were empty. Jamal pulled one open, then another and another, his movements becoming more frantic. "It's empty," he said, his voice a strange, high-pitched sound of disbelief. "Everything's empty." They rushed upstairs, a frantic, desperate energy propelling them. I followed at my own pace, the sound of their panicked voices and the slamming of drawers echoing down the stairs. I found them in my bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, a picture of serene order. But the closet door was open, revealing a row of empty hangers. The dresser drawers were all pulled out, their empty interiors a silent testament to a life that had already departed. My clothes, my shoes, my personal effects, all gone. The only things left were the heavy pieces of furniture, the bed frame, the dresser, the nightstands. "Where is it all, Dad?" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with a rising panic. He was like a looter who had broken into a treasury only to find it had been cleared out moments before. "Where is all your stuff? You can't just get rid of it. It's part of the estate. It has value." "I haven't gotten rid of it," I said calmly from the doorway. "It's where it needs to be." My enigmatic answers were fueling their frenzy. Tiffany's face was a mask of furious disbelief. "What have you done?" she accused, her voice trembling with rage. "Did you sell everything? Did you sell it all for pennies just to spite us? I knew we shouldn't have waited. We should have taken control weeks ago." The final, most damning discovery was in the garage. They stormed out the back door, and I followed them into my workshop. The space that had been the heart of my creative life, a place always filled to the brim with the organized chaos of my tools, my projects, and the rich scent of sawdust, was now a hollow, empty shell. The massive lathe was gone. The table saw was gone. The shelves that had held my collection of antique hand planes were bare. My workbench, the one I had built from a single slab of rock maple, was gone. All that remained were the faint outlines in the dust on the floor, the ghosts of a life's work. This was what finally broke Jamal. The sight of the empty workshop seemed to drain the last of the fight out of him. He leaned against the empty wall, his head in his hands. "The tools," he whispered, his voice full of a despair that was almost comical. The antique tools alone were worth a fortune. They had seen it all. They had seen the truth. The man they had planned to move, the life they had planned to uproot, was already gone. They were standing in a beautifully furnished, empty stage. They stormed back into the living room, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, rage, and a profound, unnerving confusion. They stood before me, two frantic accusers confronting a calm, unmovable judge. "Talk to us, Dad." Jamal finally exploded, his voice a raw shout of frustration. "Stop playing these games. What did you do? Where is everything? We had a buyer. We had a deal. You have ruined everything." I looked at my son, at the pathetic, greedy, desperate man he had become. The performance was over. My quiet observation was done. The time for answers had finally arrived. I slowly rose from my armchair, no longer the frail, shuffling old man, but the master of the house, the man who had built its very walls. "You have it wrong, son," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an iron bell. "I haven't ruined anything. You, on the other hand, have made a very, very serious mistake. You see, you can't sell a house that doesn't belong to you." They were like two caged, frantic animals. Having found the house stripped of everything that held personal or monetary value, they had descended into a spiral of rage and confusion. They stormed back into the living room, their faces flushed, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. The illusion of their loving concern, of their calm control, had been utterly shattered, leaving only the raw, ugly mechanics of their greed. "Where is it, Dad?" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with a rising panic. He was no longer the confident son making a tough decision. He was a looter who had broken into a treasury only to find it had been cleared out moments before. "Where is all your stuff? This is part of the estate. You can't just get rid of it. It has value." Tiffany was pacing back and forth, her hands twisting in front of her beautiful composed face now a mask of furious disbelief. "What have you done?" she accused, her voice trembling with rage. "Did you sell everything? Did you sell it all for pennies just to spite us? I knew we shouldn't have waited. We should have taken control weeks ago." Her words were a confession, a final damning admission of their true intentions, but she was too consumed by her panic to even notice. They had lost the prize, and now they were turning on each other, their accusations and their fear filling the quiet air of my home like a poisonous gas. I had been in the kitchen calmly pouring myself a glass of water. I listened to their hysteria, to the sound of their perfect plan unraveling with a strange, detached calm. The time for hiding, the time for my performance was over. The final act of the play was about to begin, and it was time for the main character to make his entrance. I walked from the kitchen into the archway of the living room and simply stood there waiting for them to notice me. It took them a moment. When Jamal finally turned and saw me, he stopped shouting mid-sentence. His mouth hung open. Tiffany followed his gaze, and her frantic pacing came to an abrupt halt. They just stared, their expressions of rage and confusion slowly being replaced by a profound, unnerving shock. They were looking at me, but they were seeing a stranger. The man they had been yelling at, the man they had been plotting against for weeks, was gone. The frail, shuffling, broken old man in the frayed cardigan and worn-out slippers had vanished. The man standing before them now was someone they did not know. I was not wearing my old sad clothes. I was wearing a crisp new polo shirt the color of a summer sky and a pair of well-pressed khaki pants. My face was clean-shaven, my hair was combed, and I was standing perfectly straight, my shoulders back, my posture as solid and unyielding as the old oak tree in the front yard. The vacant, confused expression I had so carefully cultivated was gone, replaced by a look of calm, cool, and complete control. My eyes, which I had trained to look lost and distant, were now sharp, intelligent, and fixed upon them with an unnerving intensity. In my hand I held a small, unfamiliar object that glinted in the morning light. It was a new set of car keys. I tossed them gently, a single deliberate motion, and caught them in my palm. The silence in the room was absolute. They were staring at me, at this new, impossible version of their father, and I could see the frantic calculations in their eyes. This was not the man they had assessed. This was not the feeble-minded victim they had planned for. This was not a lamb to be led to the slaughter. This was something else entirely. "Dad," Jamal finally managed to say the single word, a breath of pure, disoriented disbelief. What are you wearing? What's going on?" Tiffany, ever the pragmatist, was the first to grasp the true, terrifying implication. She was a woman who understood power, and she could feel that the power in this room had just shifted in a fundamental, irreversible way. "What have you done?" she whispered, but this time it was not an accusation. It was a question born of a dawning, terrible dread. I did not answer them. I simply held their gaze, letting them stew in their own confusion. I let them see the man they had underestimated. I let them see the strength they had mistaken for weakness, the intelligence they had dismissed as senility. I thought of the long, painful weeks of my performance, of the humiliation of playing the fool, of the disgust I had felt while listening to their condescending lies. And I felt a quiet, grim satisfaction. The costume was off. The mask was down. I was myself again, but a version of myself I hadn't known in years. I was not just Caleb the widower or Caleb the father. I was Caleb the builder, the man who had created this house, and I was about to remind them who exactly they were dealing with. I looked at my son, at his baffled, frightened face. I saw the ghost of the little boy he had been, and my heart ached for him, for the man he could have become. I looked at my daughter-in-law, at her beautiful, terrified face, and I saw the destructive, insatiable hunger of her ambition. And I knew in that moment that there was no going back. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. It was not the weak, reedy voice they had grown accustomed to. It was my old voice, my workshop voice, the voice of a man who is in charge. "Have you quite finished turning my house upside down?" They just stared at me, speechless. "Good," I said. I turned my back on them, a gesture of final dismissive authority. "Then come with me. You wanted to talk about the sale of this house. Let's talk." I walked calmly toward the front of the house, toward the waiting movers and the new life that was just beyond the door, leaving them to follow in my wake, like two frightened, disobedient children. I led them back into the living room, the room where my wife had created a lifetime of warmth and welcome. A room that had in the last month become a theater for their deceit. The air was thick with tension. The movers I could see through the window leaning against their truck were a silent ticking clock, a reminder of the grand, arrogant plan that was about to come crashing down. Jamal and Tiffany stood in the middle of the room, their confusion warring with their anger. The sight of me calm and changed had thrown them into a state of disarray, but they were not yet defeated. In their minds, they still held the winning card, the sale of the house. "Talk to us, Dad." Jamal finally exploded his voice, a raw shout of frustration that echoed in the quiet house. "Stop playing these games. What did you do? Where is everything? We had a buyer. We had a deal. You have ruined everything." I walked over to the fireplace and stood before it, my back to the empty hearth where Lena and I had shared so many winter nights. I turned to face them no longer, the shuffling, broken old man, but the builder of this house, the master of this domain. Ruined everything. I asked, my voice quiet, but carrying an authority they had not heard from me in years. "No, son, I haven't ruined anything. You, on the other hand, have made a very, very serious mistake." "What are you talking about?" Tiffany snapped, her fear making her voice sharp and brittle. "We did this for you. We found a way to secure your future, to get you the care you need." "My care," I said with a slow nod. "Yes. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your deal. Let's talk about the sale of this house." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You see, Jamal, there's a fundamental problem with your plan. A flaw in your design, you might say. You can't sell a house that doesn't belong to you." The statement was so simple, so direct, that it took a moment to register. Jamal just stared at me, his brow furrowed in a look of pure, baffled incomprehension. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Of course it belongs to us. To you. It's the family house." "Ah," I said, a sad smile touching my lips. "There's your mistake. You always saw this house as an asset, a thing to be inherited. You never saw it as a home, and you certainly never bothered to look at the paperwork." I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room, the one where Lena used to pay the bills. I opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, folded document. I walked back and laid it on the coffee table in front of them. "This," I said, "is the deed to this house. Do you see the date 15 years ago? We refinanced to put the new workshop on the garage, and at the time, for tax and liability reasons, our lawyer advised us to put the new deed solely in my name. Your mother agreed. It was her idea, in fact. This house, Jamal, has legally and exclusively belonged to me and me alone for the last 15 years. Jamal stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. He wouldn't touch it. His face, which had been red with anger, was now draining of all color. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not possible. That can't be right. Mom and Dad's house, it's ours." The word "ours" came out as a desperate, childish plea. Tiffany, ever the pragmatist, snatched the document from the table. Her eyes, sharp and quick, scanned the legal language. I watched her face, saw the moment her sharp mind understood the devastating, irrefutable truth. Her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. She knew. Jamal, however, was still fighting, still trapped in the burning wreckage of his own denial. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a trick. Some fake document you had made up. Our lawyer, Henderson." He checked the title. "He said it was clear." "Did he?" I asked quietly. "Or did you just tell him it was and he took your word for it? Did you ever actually show him the deed? Or did you just assume in your hurry and your greed that everything would fall into your lap as you believed it should?" The question hit its mark. Jamal's face crumpled. He had been so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he had overlooked the most basic, fundamental detail. He had built his entire scheme on a foundation of sand, and the tide was now coming in. But the tide was not finished. "You see, son," I continued, my voice calm and methodical, "what you did wasn't just a mistake. It has a name. It's called fraud. You signed a contract to sell a property you had no legal right to sell. That is a serious crime." At the word crime, a new kind of fear appeared in his eyes, the fear of consequences beyond just losing the money, the fear of the law. "But you're in luck," I said, "because I decided not to press charges. I was contacted, you see, by the lawyers for the buyer you found, a very eager investment group. They were doing their due diligence, something you clearly failed to do, and they discovered the discrepancy in the title. They discovered that the man selling them the house had no legal authority to do so. They were prepared to sue you, Jamal, for fraud, for damages." He looked like he was about to collapse. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "No," he moaned. but I offered them a different solution. I said, walking toward him, my shadow falling over his defeated form. I explained that you had overstepped your authority, that you were a grieving son who was not thinking clearly. I told them that while you couldn't sell them the house, I could, and that I would be willing to honor the price you had negotiated. His head snapped up, a wild, desperate hope in his eyes. You did, I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out another folded document. My own contract. I met with them yesterday. We signed the papers. The sale is official. The house is sold. So the money... He stammered, the hope in his voice pathetic. The money is still coming. I looked at him, at the full, tragic depth of his delusion. Even now, even after all of this, he still believed he was entitled to it. I let him hang on that thread of hope for a moment longer before I cut it. Yes, son, I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass. The money is still coming. The full $750,000. It was wired this morning directly into a private trust account that your mother set up for me. I paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. Thank you, by the way, for finding such an eager buyer. You got me a very good price. And that was it. That was the moment he finally broke. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a vast empty darkness. It was the look of a man whose soul had just been extinguished. The rage was gone. The denial was gone. All that was left was the raw, gaping wound of his own failure. He made a sound, a low, guttural moan of pure despair. He had not just failed to get the money, he had personally gift-wrapped it and delivered it directly into my hands. His grand, brilliant plan had resulted in his own complete and utter ruin. But the debts, he whispered, his voice the broken sound of a man confessing his sins. Tiffany, we needed that money. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pathetic, pleading desperation. The predator was gone, and in his place was the weak, frightened boy he had always been. I looked at my son, at the man he had become, a man who had been willing to throw his own father into a home and sell his childhood memories to pay for his wife's shopping habits. And the last remnants of my fatherly pity evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard finality of justice. Lena's justice. Those sound like your problems, son, I said. Not mine. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating thing. My son Jamal was a collapsed ruin on the sofa, his head in his hands, the full weight of his colossal failure finally crashing down upon him. He had gambled everything on my weakness, and he had lost in a way he had never imagined possible. Tiffany stood frozen in the middle of the room, her face a pale, blank mask of shock. The numbers, the brutal, final numbers, were running through her mind. The loss of the house, the loss of the money, the loss of the life she had been so certain was hers. They were adrift in the wreckage of their own greed, and the storm they had unleashed had consumed them utterly. I looked at them, my children, or the strangers who wore their faces, and I felt a profound and weary sadness. This was the end of the road, the tragic, inevitable destination their choices had led them to. I had no more anger left, only a deep, hollow ache for the family that had been and the one that could never be. I walked slowly through the living room, the room they had so eagerly planned to gut, and renovate the room they had just mentally stripped for parts. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn wood of the mantelpiece I had built with my own hands. I paused before Lena's favorite armchair, its floral pattern faded from years of sunlight and shared stories. Your mother and I began, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. We always wanted to leave you something, a legacy, something to remember us by, and we have. At my words, a flicker of something wild and desperate appeared in Jamal's eyes. He looked up at me, his face a mess of confusion and a tiny, insane spark of hope. Was there something else? Another account? A piece of the puzzle he had missed. Tiffany's gaze snapped toward me, her mind, ever the calculator, instantly searching for a new angle, a new possibility. I let them hang on that fragile thread for a moment before I cut it. All of this, I said, my voice soft but unyielding as I made a slow, sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire room. The sofa, the dining table your mother cherished, the one where we hosted 50 years of Thanksgiving dinners, the grandfather clock that belonged to my own father, the beds upstairs where you slept as children, all the furniture you were so eager to put into storage. It's all yours. Consider it your inheritance. The words landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating thud. It was a gesture of such profound, insulting finality that it took them a moment to even process it. The furniture. The physical objects, the heavy, cumbersome shells of a life they had disdained. Just hours ago, Tiffany had been appraising these items with a cold, greedy eye. Now they were a burden, a liability. They were the ones who would have to pay the movers who were still waiting outside to haul away this mountain of wood and fabric that was now their only inheritance. Its monetary value was a pittance, a cruel joke compared to the fortune they had just lost. Tiffany let out a sound, a choked, incredulous laugh that held no humor. The furniture, she whispered the words, laced with a venomous disbelief. "You're leaving us the furniture." She looked at the antique display cabinet, the one she had coveted, and her expression was not one of desire, but of pure, unadulterated hatred. Jamal just stared at me, his face blank. He was beyond anger now. He was in a place of pure hollow shock, a place where the cruelty of his own mother and father was a concept too vast to comprehend. I did not wait for their gratitude. I walked to the front hall where a single small duffel bag sat by the door. It had been sitting there the whole time, a quiet, unassuming object they had not even noticed in their arrogant rush to take possession of the house. I picked it up. It was light. It held only a few changes of clothes, a book, and a photograph of my wife. It was all I needed. Jamal finally found his voice, a last pathetic attempt to salvage a shred of dignity, to pretend he still had some knowledge, some control. "So where are you going now, Dad?" He sneered, his voice a ragged, ugly thing. "Back to your armchair to talk to Mom's picture. Sunny Meadows won't be so bad. At least your expenses are paid." I turned to face them one last time, the duffel bag in one hand, the new set of car keys in the other. I allowed myself a small, sad smile. "I'm not going to Sunny Meadows, son," I said quietly. "You were right about one thing. My expenses are indeed paid." And then I told them the final truth. The secret that Lena had armed me with her last and most brilliant gift. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," I said, my voice filled with a love and pride that was as real as their greed was false. "She saw all of this coming. She saw you, and she loved you, but she was not blind, and so she made her own arrangements. For me." I told them about the quiet sale of the stock portfolio, and then I told them about the villa. "She bought a house for me on the shore of Lake Norman," I said. I described it briefly the way she had described it to me, a place of peace and light. "It has a large workshop right on the water, a place where I can make things again." And then the final crushing blow. "She also left me a trust fund," I said, $900,000, more than enough to live out the rest of my days in comfort. "Your mother took care of me, son. She made sure I would have peace in my final years, safe from the demands of those who would see me only as a resource." This was the moment of their ultimate despair. The revelation of the villa and the money was the final absolute confirmation of their total catastrophic defeat. It was not just that they had lost, it was that I had won in a way they could never have imagined. Tiffany's reaction was silent but profound. She was a woman who had built her entire identity on the acquisition of wealth and status. The knowledge that I, the old man she had dismissed, was now about to live the very life she had coveted, a beautiful waterfront property, immense wealth, total freedom, while she was facing foreclosure debt and humiliation, was a poison that shattered her from the inside out. Her perfect, beautiful mask of a face seemed to crack. She made a small, soundless noise, a gasp of pure agony, and then she slid to the floor, her body folding in on itself in a posture of complete and utter despair. Jamal's annihilation was quieter, but more complete. For him, this was the final irrefutable proof of his mother's final judgment of his father's victory over him. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and left with nothing but a pile of old furniture and a mountain of debt. All the anger, all the fight drained out of him, leaving him hollow. A ghost in a house that was no longer his. He looked at me not as his father, but as a symbol of everything he had tried to be, and had so spectacularly failed to become. I looked at the wreckage of my children, at the two broken people on the floor of my empty house. There was nothing left to say. My promise to Lena was fulfilled. I had watched them, and they had shown me who they were. I turned and walked out the front door into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. I did not look back. Behind me, I left them in the house they had tried to steal, surrounded by the inheritance they so richly deserved. Ahead of me was a new car, a new home, and a new quiet life paid for by the fierce, protective, and unending love of my wife. I was finally free. I looked at the wreckage of my children, at the two broken people on the floor of my home, a home that was no longer mine. Tiffany was a heap of designer clothes and silent, shuddering despair. Jamal was hollowed out, a ghost haunted by the catastrophic consequences of his own greed. The great climactic confrontation was over, and it had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet final implosion of their world. There was nothing left to say. There was no anger left in me, only a vast, empty landscape of sorrow. My promise to Lena was fulfilled. I had watched them, and they had shown me who they were, and now my part in their lives was over. With a slowness that felt both ancient and deliberate, I took one last look around the living room. My eyes, the eyes of the builder, traced the lines of the room I had designed and constructed half a century ago. I saw the strong, simple beam of heart pine I had salvaged for the mantelpiece. I saw the wide oak floorboards I had laid and pegged by hand, the same floorboards that had been worn smooth by the running feet of children, by the slow, comfortable dance of a long and happy marriage, and now by the frantic, panicked pacing of my son's ruin. This house was not just a structure, it was my life's work. It was a library of memories, and every corner, every scuff mark, every worn spot on the carpet was a page in that story. I was not just leaving a building, I was closing the book on my own life. I turned away from the room and began to walk toward the front door. I did not look down at my son, who was still slumped on the sofa, a statue of defeat. I did not look at my daughter-in-law, who was still huddled on the floor. To look at them would be to engage to invite a final, useless plea, and I had nothing left to give them. They were strangers now, inhabitants of a sad foreign country of their own, making a country to which I would never again travel. As I walked through the foyer, my hand brushed against the worn, smooth curve of the wooden banister. I remembered a younger, happier Jamal sliding down it with a whoop of pure childish joy, and Lena scolding him with a laugh in her voice. The memory was not a comfort. It was a sharp, painful reminder of the boy who had been lost, the boy who had grown into the broken man now sitting in my living room. I felt a final terrible pang of fatherly grief. It was a quiet, internal amputation, the severing of a bond that I had once believed was unbreakable. I reached the front door. My hand rested on the cool brass doorknob. This was the final threshold. On one side of this door was the entire history of my life as a husband and a father. On the other, an unknown future, a blank page. I thought of Lena, of her brilliant, fierce, and loving heart. She had known this moment would come. She had built a bridge for me, a bridge from this world of pain and betrayal to a new world of peace, and all I had to do was have the courage to walk across it. I opened the door. The bright morning sun was a shock after the dim, heavy atmosphere of the house. The air was fresh and clean. The world outside was still turning oblivious to the quiet tragedy that had just unfolded within my walls. I saw the moving truck still parked at the curb, an absurd monument to my son's failed coup. The movers were leaning against it, smoking their faces, a mixture of boredom and curiosity. I gave them a single firm nod, a silent dismissal. Their services would not be required. I saw my neighbors, old Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, peeking out from behind their curtains. They had been our friends for 40 years. They had watched my children grow up. What would they think of this scene? A moving truck, a son and a daughter-in-law in despair, and an old man walking away from it all. I knew there would be talk, speculation, gossip. But it no longer mattered. I was leaving this neighborhood, this life, this identity behind. I walked down the path I had laid with my own hands, and I did not look back. My eyes were fixed on the car parked at the curb. It was not a flashy car. It was a solid, comfortable, dark blue sedan. A car for a man who values quality and peace, not status. It was the car Lena would have picked for me. Mr. Clayton, her lawyer, had delivered it yesterday. He had handed me the keys and said, "Your wife wanted you to have a reliable vehicle for your new beginning, Mr. Sterling." A new beginning. At 75 years old. I got into the car. The seats were still new, the smell of clean leather, a stark contrast to the familiar 50-year-old scent of my home. I put the key in the ignition and started the engine. It was quiet, a low, steady hum. I put my small duffel bag on the passenger seat beside me. Everything I owned, everything I had chosen to keep from my old life was in that one small bag. It felt strangely liberating. This was the moment of truth. My home, the beautiful, flawed, tragic history of my life was in the rearview mirror. I could turn my head. I could take one last look. I could see the house I had built, the porch where Lena and I had sat on 1,000 summer evenings. I could see the window of my son's old bedroom. I could indulge in one final painful act of remembrance. But I did not. I kept my eyes fixed forward through the clean, clear glass of the windshield. The past was a ghost. The future was an open road. And my wife had given me a map. I put the car in drive. The tires crunched softly on the gravel as I pulled away from the curb. I did not speed. I drove slowly, calmly away from the wreckage. I drove past my neighbors' curious faces, past the familiar trees and houses of my old life. At the end of the street, I signaled and I made the turn. And I did not look back. I was driving toward the lake, toward the workshop that was waiting for me, toward the peace my Serafina had so lovingly prepared. The tears that finally came were not tears of sorrow for what I had lost. They were tears of gratitude for the love that had in the end saved me. The weeks that followed my departure were a time of quiet and deliberate rebuilding. I was a man learning a new language, the language of peace. My new home, the villa on the shores of Lake Norman that Lena had so lovingly chosen for me, was a sanctuary. The air here was different, clean and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and the sound of water lapping against the shore. I spent my days setting up my new workshop in the large detached garage. Unpacking my old tools, the familiar heavy weight of them in my hands was like reconnecting with an old and trusted friend. I began to work again, the simple, honest labor of shaping wood, quieting the lingering ghosts in my mind. The rhythmic rasp of a hand plane, the clean bite of a sharp chisel. These were my therapy, my prayer. I was not just building furniture. I was building a new life, one splinter at a time. I did not think of my children, or rather I tried not to. I had closed the door on that part of my life, and I knew that to look back would be to invite the pain back in. But the past is not so easily dismissed. It has a way of finding you. One rainy afternoon, about a month after I had left, the phone rang. It was not the burner phone, which now lay silent and unused in a drawer. It was the new landline I had installed. I answered, and a familiar voice came through, a voice from my old life. "Caleb, it's Evelyn from next door, Mrs. Evelyn, our neighbor for 40 years. A kind, sharp-eyed woman who had been one of Lena's closest confidants. "Evelyn," I said, a warmth spreading through my chest. "It is so good to hear your voice. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine, dear," she said, but her voice was heavy. "The real question is, how are you? I was so worried. After you left. It was all so sudden." "I'm all right, Evelyn," I told her. "I'm in a good place. Lena made sure of that." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes," she said quietly. "She was a smart woman, your Lena. She saw things. She knew." Then her voice dropped. "Caleb, I'm calling because I thought you should know what happened after you drove away. It's been quite the spectacle over here." And then she told me. Her words painted a picture so vivid, so tragic, that I closed my eyes and saw it all unfold as if I were standing right there on my old front lawn. She said the first thing that happened right after my car had turned the corner was the argument with the movers. The crew, confused and impatient, had approached Jamal for payment for their time, and Jamal, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, had nothing to give them. Evelyn, watching from her living room window, saw the confrontation escalate. She saw the foreman, a large, angry man, get right in Jamal's face. She saw Jamal, my son, who had always prided himself on his smooth talk and confident demeanor, shrink before this man's working-class fury. The movers eventually left their boss, vowing to sue Jamal for the full cost of the day. But that, Evelyn said, was only the beginning. The moment the moving truck finally rumbled away, the real explosion happened, the one between Jamal and Tiffany. The performance was over, the audience was gone, and the two lead actors in this tragedy of greed finally turned on each other. Evelyn said she couldn't hear all the words, but the rage was a palpable thing even from across the street. She saw Tiffany screaming at Jamal, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, unrecognizable snarl. She saw her pointing a shaking finger at him, then at the house, then back at him. She was blaming him for his failure, for his weakness, for his inability to deliver the prize she had been promised, and she saw Jamal scream back, his own face a mask of desperation and hatred. The power couple, the united front, had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The days that followed, Evelyn told me, were a slow, humiliating descent into chaos. They were trapped in a house that was no longer theirs, a house that now felt like a mausoleum filled with the ghosts of a fortune they had lost. And they were trapped with the furniture, the inheritance I had so generously left them. Tiffany, Evelyn said, had tried to sell it. The woman who had once breezed through luxury boutiques was now making frantic, desperate calls to second-hand furniture dealers. Evelyn saw the vans arrive one by one. She saw men in dusty overalls walk through the house, shaking their heads. She saw one of them talk to Tiffany on the porch, saw him laugh and make a low, insulting offer. The priceless antiques Tiffany had been cataloging in her mind were in the harsh light of the real world, just old, dated furniture. The mahogany dining set your mother loved so much. Caleb, Evelyn's voice was full of a sad irony. They sold it for $300 just to have it hauled away. The inheritance was not a windfall. It was a burden, a physical reminder of their spectacular failure. Then the creditors came. The sure thing Jamal had promised them, the asset that was about to be freed up, had vanished, and they were no longer patient. Evelyn described the cars that started showing up at all hours. Expensive cars with tinted windows carrying men in sharp suits who did not look like friendly visitors. They would knock on the door, their knocks growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. Legal notices began to appear, taped to the front door like scarlet letters of financial shame. The ultimate humiliation came on a Tuesday morning. Evelyn had been in her garden when she saw the tow truck arrive. She watched as a man got out, checked the VIN number on Tiffany's gleaming white SUV, and began to hook it up. Tiffany had come running out of the house, screaming, pleading. But the man had just shaken his head, handed her a piece of paper, and proceeded to drag the ultimate symbol of her coveted status out of the driveway and down the street. She was left standing on the curb, a queen without her chariot, her reign of arrogance and entitlement officially over. The marriage, Evelyn said, could not survive it. A partnership built on the promise of future wealth had no foundation to withstand the crushing reality of present failure. The final argument, she said, was the worst of all. The shouting lasted for hours, ugly, vicious words echoing through the quiet neighborhood. And then it was over. Evelyn watched as a taxi pulled up. She watched as Tiffany stormed out of the house, dragging a single, hastily packed suitcase behind her. She threw the suitcase into the trunk, got into the back seat without a single look back, and was gone. Jamal was left alone. Alone in the empty house that was no longer his. Alone with the scorn of the neighbors, the fury of his creditors, and the deafening, all-consuming silence of his own ruin. He stayed there for 2 more days, a ghost in the wreckage, before the new owners came with their own lawyer to have him formally evicted. As I listened to Evelyn's sad, detailed account, I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I felt only a profound, aching sorrow. I looked out the window of my new home at the calm, peaceful water of the lake. I was hearing the story of my son's self-destruction, and all I could think of was Lena's voice in that sterile room, her eyes filled with a mother's terrible, clear-sighted pain. She had known this would happen. She had known their bond was as hollow as their hearts. Her plan had not been to destroy them. It had been to reveal them, to force them to finally confront the empty, rotten foundation upon which they had built their lives. And as I hung up the phone, the peace I felt was a heavy, somber thing. It was the peace of a promise fulfilled, the peace of a terrible, necessary justice, and the sad, quiet peace of a father who had finally and forever let his son go. The first few months at the villa on Lake Norman passed in a quiet, peaceful blur. The transition from the tense, suffocating atmosphere of my old life to the clean, open air of this new one was like coming up for breath after being held underwater for a very long time. I had spent my entire life in the city, in the house I had built with my own hands. I thought its familiar walls were a part of me, but here in this place my Lena had chosen for me. I learned that a home is not the walls that surround you, but the peace you find within them. The villa was a simple, elegant structure of stone and cedar nestled in a grove of tall pine trees, its wide windows looking out over the calm, blue-green water of the lake. It was not a grand or ostentatious place. It was a place of quiet dignity, a place designed for contemplation. It was a house that listened more than it spoke. And in its quiet, I began to heal. My days found a new, gentle rhythm, a rhythm dictated not by a clock, but by the sun and the water. I would wake with the first gray light of dawn, make myself a cup of strong black coffee, and sit on the wide stone patio that overlooked the lake. I would watch the mist rise off the water, watch the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, and I would feel a sense of peace that I thought had been lost to me forever. In the city, the mornings had been filled with the sounds of traffic and the anxieties of the coming day. Here the mornings were filled with the sound of birdsong and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. After my coffee, I would walk down the short path to the large detached garage that Lena had made sure was part of the property. This was the heart of my new life, my workshop. It was larger and brighter than my old one, with a wide roll-up door that I kept open to the lake, letting in the light and the fresh, pine-scented air. It had taken me a week to unpack my tools, the precious few I had managed to spirit away from my old home before the end. Arranging them on the new walls, setting up the new workbench, was a sacred, deliberate process. Each tool the familiar weight of a well-balanced hammer. The smooth, cool steel of a hand plane was a connection to the man I had been, the builder, the craftsman. I had begun a new project, the first in what felt like a lifetime. It was a chair. An armchair built from a single magnificent slab of black walnut I had bought from a local lumberyard. But it was not just any chair. It was a replica of the armchair that had sat in our living room for 50 years, the one with the faded floral pattern, the one that had been Lena's favorite. The work was slow, methodical, and deeply satisfying. It was a conversation between me and the wood. I would spend hours running my hands over the grain, feeling its history, its imperfections, its potential. The act of creation, of taking something raw and shaping it into a thing of beauty and purpose, was a balm to my soul. The rhythmic rasp of a hand plane shaving a perfect paper-thin curl from the board. The clean, satisfying bite of a sharp chisel, cutting a mortise, the quiet concentration required to join two pieces of wood so perfectly they seemed to grow together. This was my therapy. This was my prayer. As I worked, my mind was free to wander. I would think of Lena not with the sharp, stabbing pain of fresh grief, but with a warm, quiet sense of her presence. I felt she was here with me in the workshop, her spirit infused in the sunlight that streamed through the open door, her voice a whisper in the sound of the wind through the pines. I was not building this chair to mourn her. I was building it to invite her into my new home, to create a space for her to sit with me in the long, quiet evenings. Sometimes a memory of my old life would surface. As I was teaching myself to cut a particularly complex dovetail joint, I had a sudden vivid memory of a 10-year-old Jamal standing on a stool in my old workshop, his face a mask of concentration as he tried to hammer a nail into a block of scrap wood. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he had finally driven it in straight. The memory did not bring the hot surge of anger and betrayal that it would have a few months ago. It was just sad. A poignant, faded photograph of a boy who had been lost somewhere on the long, hard road to becoming a man. I felt a deep, philosophical sorrow for him, for the wrong turns he had taken, for the cheap, glittering prizes he had chased, instead of the solid, lasting joy of building something with his own two hands. One afternoon I was working on the curved arms of the chair, the most difficult part of the design. It required a patience and a precision that bordered on meditative. I had to steam the wood to gently, slowly bend it into its final, graceful shape. It was a process that could not be rushed. If you forced it, the wood would splinter and break. You had to listen to it, to feel its willingness to work with it, not against it. As I clamped the final, perfectly curved piece into place, I stepped back and looked at my work. The chair was taking shape. It was no longer just a collection of disconnected pieces of wood. It was becoming a whole, a thing of grace and strength. And in that moment I saw a reflection of myself. I too had been a collection of broken pieces, the grieving widower, the betrayed father, the angry soldier. But the slow, steady work of building this new life, the quiet rhythm of the days, the honest labor of my hands, it was all slowly, gently bending me back into a new and stronger shape. I was not the man I had been before. That man was gone forever. But the man I was becoming here in this quiet sanctuary by the lake was someone who understood the value of patience. Someone who knew that the most beautiful things in life, a well-made chair, a lasting love, a hard-won peace, could not be rushed. They had to be built slowly, deliberately, and with a deep and abiding respect for the materials at hand. The days at the lake bled into weeks, and the weeks into a season of quiet healing. The frantic, ugly noise of my old life faded, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of the natural world. The call of a loon across the water at dawn. The rustle of the wind through the tall pine trees, the slow, rhythmic rasp of my hand plane against a slab of beautiful, honest wood. I was a man in sanctuary, a place my Lena had built for me with the last ounces of her strength and the full, brilliant force of her love. In my new workshop, I had been working on a single devotional project, a chair. An armchair built from a magnificent piece of black walnut, a perfect replica of the one that had been Lena's favorite, the one that now sat in a stranger's house. For months it had been my focus, my meditation. Every carefully cut joint, every smoothly sanded curve was a conversation with her, a way of honoring her memory, not with tears, but with the craft that had defined my life. Today was the day I finished it. I had spent the morning applying the final coat of hand-rubbed oil, watching the wood grain come alive, its deep rich colors glowing with a life of their own. It was a beautiful thing, strong and elegant, a testament to the idea that with patience and care something wonderful could be built from raw, unfinished material. I ran my hand over the smooth curved armrest, the wood warm and alive beneath my touch. The chair was done, my work was done, and I knew where it belonged. I carefully carried it from the workshop across the green lawn and into the villa. I placed it in the spot I had prepared for it by the large picture window in the living room, the spot that had the best view of the lake and the setting sun. It was her spot. I didn't sit in it. I pulled up another simpler chair and sat opposite it, as if she were sitting there with me, a quiet companion, in the afternoon light. The house was silent, and in that silence I finally allowed myself to reflect on the entirety of the painful, transformative journey I had been on. I thought of my children, of the ruin they had brought upon themselves. I had heard whispers through old neighbors who still called to check on me of their miserable fate. Of Jamal's bankruptcy, of Tiffany's departure, of the sad, lonely spectacle of their lives unraveling. And as I sat there, I searched my own heart for any trace of triumph, of gleeful revenge, and I found none. There was no joy in their destruction. There was only a profound and weary sadness, the quiet ache of a father who had outlived the children he had once known. What Lena had planned, what I had executed, it was not revenge. Revenge is a hot, angry, selfish thing. It is a fire that consumes the person who wields it as surely as it consumes its target. This had been different. This had been an act of justice. It was a cold, precise, and necessary rebalancing of the scales. It was not about causing them pain. It was about ending the pain they were causing to others and to themselves. It was about restoring a moral order to a world they had tried to twist to their own selfish ends. Lena had not sought to destroy them. She had simply removed the safety net of our love and our wealth, and had allowed them for the first time in their lives to feel the full crushing weight of their own choices. It was a harsh lesson, a terrible lesson, but it was a just one. I looked at the empty chair and I thought of my wife. I had spent 50 years loving a woman I thought I knew completely. But in her final months she had revealed a side of herself I had never seen, a strategist, a warrior, a queen defending her kingdom. I had always been the builder, the one who worked with solid, tangible things. But she, in her final days, had become the architect. She had designed a structure of such brilliant, devastating elegance, a fortress of legal and moral truth, that it had protected me and preserved everything we truly valued. I felt a surge of awe, a love and respect for her that was deeper than ever before. She had faced the end not with fear, but with a fierce, protective clarity that was the ultimate expression of her love. And me, I was the man she had left behind to see her work completed. I had been forced to become a soldier in a war I never wanted. But in that fight, in the painful, ugly process of confronting the truth, I had found something unexpected. I had found a new version of myself, a man who was not just a father or a husband, but a guardian of a legacy. I looked out at the lake, the water sparkling as the sun began its slow descent. The peace I felt was not the empty, passive peace of a man waiting for his end. It was an active, vibrant peace, a peace born of purpose. I had not found peace in spite of my grief. I had found it through my grief. I had honored my wife's memory not by looking backward at the life we had lost, but by building the new life she had so carefully planned for me. The pain of her absence was a permanent part of me, but it no longer defined me. It was now just one color in a much larger, more beautiful landscape. I looked back at the empty chair bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. It was waiting. It would always be waiting. It was a symbol of her presence, of her enduring love. And it was a promise. A promise that even after the most terrible of storms, there could be a quiet, beautiful dawn. And I was finally truly at peace. A full year has passed since the day I drove away from my old life, a year of quiet sunrises over the lake, of the steady, honest work of my hands, of a peace so profound it feels like a different state of being. The seasons have turned, and with them the pages of my own life have turned to a new and final chapter. I am sitting on the patio of the villa, a place that is no longer new, but is now simply home. The armchair I built for Lena sits empty, but present by the window, a silent, graceful companion. In my lap is this old leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the story I have felt compelled to write down. I am writing it not as an indictment, not to create a record of blame or to relish in the downfall of my children. I am writing to understand, to bear witness to the strange, painful, and ultimately liberating journey that brought me from the deepest grief to this quiet, sunlit peace. Looking back, I see now that what happened was not just a family drama. It was a profound and terrible lesson on the nature of value, a lesson I had been too blind to learn over a lifetime. I think of my son Jamal and his wife Tiffany. I do not feel the hot sting of anger anymore. That fire has long since burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of a deep and abiding sorrow. I have tried to understand the choices they made, the path that led them from being the children I loved to the strangers who stood before me on that final rainy night. Their greed, I see now, was a sickness of the soul. It was a hunger that could not be filled, a thirst that could not be quenched. For Tiffany, it was a desperate, grasping need for status, a belief that her worth as a person was defined by the brand of her handbag or the square footage of her house. She had built a life that was a beautiful, hollow facade, and she was terrified of the world seeing the emptiness behind it. And Jamal, my son, he was not a monster. He was simply weak. His love for his wife was tangled up in his desire to give her the glittering world she demanded, and his own pride would not let him admit that he was failing. Their love was not a partnership. It was a conspiracy of two against a reality they could not afford. They were in a prison of their own making, and they saw my home, my legacy, as their only key to escape. And what of my role in it? I have asked myself that question 1,000 times in the long, quiet hours before dawn. Did I enable him? Did Lena and I, in our love for our only son, shield him too much from the hard edges of the world? Did our generosity become a crutch that prevented him from ever learning to stand on his own 2 feet? Perhaps. A parent's love is a powerful, blinding force. We gave him what we thought was a foundation, but for him, it became a safety net he never learned to live without. But in the end, I have made peace with the fact that while our love may have been a contributing factor, the choices were his alone. I did not make him lie. I did not make him scheme. I did not make him value a quick sale over 50 years of family history. He chose that path himself. And then there is Lena, my brilliant, fierce, and loving Lena. This whole journey, I realize now, has been my final conversation with her. Every step of her plan that I executed, every lie I told to ensnare the deceitful, every truth I revealed in that cold courtroom was a sentence in that conversation. In her final months, when I saw only a frail woman succumbing to illness, she was a general surveying the battlefield, anticipating her enemy's every move and drawing up a plan for a war she knew she would not live to see. I had spent my life thinking I was the builder, the strong one who worked with solid, tangible things. But in the end, she was the true architect. She had designed a structure of such devastating elegance, a fortress of legal and moral truth that had protected me and preserved everything we truly valued. She taught me the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge is a hot, selfish fire, a destructive act born of pain. What she planned was something else entirely. It was a rebalancing. It was the calm, precise, and necessary restoration of order. Her plan was not to ruin our children, but simply to hold up a mirror to their souls. She did not take their future away. She simply removed the unearned inheritance that was preventing them from ever having to build one of their own. Her justice was not a destructive act. It was a creative one. She took the money they coveted and turned it into a sanctuary for me. She took the house they wanted to sell and turned it into a legacy for the community. It was a builder's solution, not a demolisher's. And in seeing her plan through, I was transformed. I thought my life was over when she died. I was a man ready for the quiet gray twilight of his days, but she left me one last great project. She called me to a final battle not for myself, but for the honor of the life we had built together. And in that fight, in the painful necessity of becoming a performer, a strategist, a soldier, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. It was not the strength of a young man full of fire and fury. It was the quiet, unyielding strength of old wood of a foundation that has weathered a lifetime of storms and refuses to break. I close this journal now, not because the story is over, but because it has found its true beginning. Through the open window of my workshop, I can hear the sound of a boat's motor on the lake, the distant laughter of children playing on a dock. The chair I made for Lena sits by the window in the house, a silent, graceful guardian. I am surrounded not by the ghosts of a painful past, but by the quiet, steady promise of a peaceful future. I have found that a legacy is not an inheritance you leave to your bloodline. It is the principles you build your life upon, principles of integrity, of love, of community. And a home is not just the wood and nails you use to build it, but the trust you build within its walls. I am at peace now, a deep and abiding peace. I have done my duty, I have honored my wife, and I am finally truly home. A year has passed. A year of quiet sunrises over the lake, of the steady, honest work of my hands, of a peace so profound it feels like a different state of being. The villa my Lena chose for me is no longer a new house. It is a home filled with the scent of fresh-cut walnut from my workshop and the comfortable silence of a life well lived. I often sit here on the porch in the evenings watching the water turn to glass as the sun sets, and I reflect on the strange and painful journey that brought me to this place. I no longer feel the hot sting of anger when I think of my son. That fire has long since burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold gray ash of a deep and abiding sorrow. I have come to understand that his greed was not a sign of strength, but of a profound weakness. He and his wife were chasing a life they believed they were entitled to, a life of glittering surfaces and hollow status. They were so blinded by the price of everything that they had forgotten the value of anything. In their desperate attempt to seize a material inheritance, they forfeited the only one that truly mattered, the inheritance of love, honor, and family. Their story is a tragedy, a cautionary tale about how a house full of possessions can be the emptiest place in the world. My wife, my brilliant Lena, saw this with a clarity that still takes my breath away. Her final plan was not an act of revenge. Revenge is a destructive, angry force. What she did was an act of creation. It was the last, most beautiful thing she ever built. She did not seek to ruin our son, but to reveal him to himself, to strip away the false foundation of our wealth and force him for the first time to confront the man he had become. And for me, she built a sanctuary. She gave me not just a house and a fortune, but a future. She gave me the chance to be a builder again, to create a new life from the ashes of the old one. I learned that the strongest walls are not made of brick and mortar, but of love and trust. And when that trust is broken, a house ceases to be a home. It becomes just a property, an asset to be sold, a thing without a soul. Lena's final greatest lesson was, this true wealth is not the land you own or the money you have, but the principles you refuse to sell. I learned that a home is not just the wood and nails you use to build it, but the trust you build within its walls. My wife taught me that true wealth isn't the property you own, but the principles you refuse to sell. Greed is a loud, demanding guest, but it always leaves you with an empty house. True strength, I found, is not in the battles you win, but in the quiet dignity with which you refuse to fight on your enemy's terms, choosing instead to build a new life on your own. What do you think of Lena's final, brilliant act of justice? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of a promise kept resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for listening.